Hello, people. We're doing a special pop-up show. We got the crew here. I'm Kendrick. That man there is Ken. He knows everything we're going to talk about today. And down below me is Chris Stevens. If you haven't heard, Hugh Jackson lost to Bayou Plastic and then lost his job 3 days later. And we're going to be here to talk about it with the crew. Um, Ken knows most of the details, but a quick rundown of it is like we kind of found this out Ken last night that Hugh Jackson was going to be dismissed. It's a little bit inside baseball here. Like we knew, but didn't report because we respect our sources. And at the time, Hugh Jackson did not know, and so when word became official, we put it out there. But yeah, so Ken, like, what do you make of what went down the last 24 hours or so?
Well, let's first get some details straight because unfortunately, due to previous reports or whatever the case may be, it needs to be understood now, and it's important that we get through the details. Hugh Jackson did not retire, as some would lead you to think, or as some are indicating on social media. Hugh Jackson did not retire as Grambling's head coach. He was fired. And the reason why the details matter is because if indeed Hugh Jackson had retired, then Grambling wouldn't owe him a dime. Or if he had not left the program for another, or had he left the program for another head coaching job, he would have in fact owed Grambling some money. Okay, but that's not the case. He was fired, and as a result of that, Grambling will be on the hook to pay him for the remaining portion of his contract, which was a 4-year deal, but only 2 years of the contract are guaranteed. So he will continue to receive payments throughout the course of the fiscal year until May. And then at that point, it's over. So there is no massive buyout, as a lot of people have speculated. That's not the case. He will continue to receive payments, as I'm told, through the rest of the fiscal year. And then once the fiscal year is over in May, he's done. Or the payments to Hugh Jackson is done. But he did not retire. He was fired, and and Grambling is still obligated to pay him for the rest of the fiscal year.
So, Ken, from what you understand, why was the decision made now to let Hugh Jackson go?
Well, look, man, we live in a society now to where it's all about what can you do for me right now. When you put in consideration individuals who are in the transfer portal or who have the players who have the option to go into the transfer portal, you know, the least little thing that doesn't go right for them, they're gone. And some, applaud the fact that they have the ability to do that. Some say that it creates a problem, but nevertheless, it is present, and it's something that coaches have to deal with. But the fact of the matter is, Hugh Jackson went 3-8 his first year. He went 5-6 his second year. And the higher ups just simply thought that given how the program has progressed over those 2 years, they just thought it was time to pull the plug. Now, I will say this, and I wear two hats as a journalist, and of course, you guys know, I'm a stakeholder, if you will. I attended school, and I wanted to do well. If it were up to me, I would have given Hugh Jackson at least a third year. I am on record telling you guys that I don't necessarily think or hold him responsible for the first year, given how that situation went with Art Browse. I'm very consistent in this. And because he couldn't make, and again, I want to make this clear, I'm not saying that him hiring Art Browse would have made a difference, but if you're going to hold a coach accountable for wins and losses, you have to let that coach as he sees fit. He has to have the autonomy to coach as he sees fit. And so when you have higher ups who come and chop his legs and say, no, we're not going to go that direction. You're going to have to you have to go someplace else. Then, well, you know what? You can't really hold him accountable for what goes on in that season. So that was season 1. All right. We went 3-8. Season 2, he's had a chance at that point to get familiar with the lay of the land. He knows how the administration operates, and did what I think is safe to say better than a decent job of getting recruits and making that program better from a talent perspective, better than when it was when he had inherited. I think it goes without saying that the talent on this team is a significant upgrade compared to where it was not only last year, but certainly where it was when he first got in. So I can't sit up here and tell you that I am crazy about him leaving after 2 years. I would have given him that 3rd year. But I don't make the decisions, obviously, but I'm certainly am not one of those who was ready for him to go. I get the frustration. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you I wasn't frustrated, but I just think that this is probably one of those moves that long-term would have been in the best interest for the university to sit and give him at least another year.
Yeah, you saw a comment there from Stephen Campbell. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. You also got on the chat with us today, Brandon King, one of our contributors. Well, did Grambling make a mistake by letting go Hugh Jackson 2 years into a 4-year contract? I'm gonna start with Chris on that one. It seems to be like a quick hook for a guy who had NFL experience, had college experience, was a high-profile hire when it was made. You'll think he may get a little bit more time, but that apparently wasn't the case, despite improving the win total from year 1 and year 2.
Well, yeah, I'm with you. I thought it was way too soon. As Ken, because Ken has context. He's a Graham alum. He's followed the program very closely. If certain alumni feel like they were closer to being, competitive than than even some other alumni realize, then yes, you absolutely give Hugh Jackson the 3rd year. What this does, honestly, is it starts to cycle all over again. Coaches, as I've maintained this for as long as I've been covering high school and college sports, which is going on 22 years now, you need to give a coach 3 years, no matter if it's high school or college, because the cyclical nature of prep sports is kids graduate, kids transfer, kids get hurt, kids are ineligible. But whatever the case, you have to give a coach a time to cycle out the previous regime's athletes and schemes and all of that, and give them time to get their type of athletes and strategies in place. And I don't think 2 years is enough time for anyone, especially not Hugh Jackson, who honestly came into this. Yes, I was the one last week that said that Grambling couldn't have Art Browse on the staff, and that I still stand on that. But at the same time, as Ken said, if you're gonna bring this guy in knowing that he's been an NFL head coach, has tons of experience, then you have to let him be that guy. You have to let him coach his program the way he sees fit. Granted, the shenanigans with Browse may have been just too much to overlook, but yes, that already put Grambling behind the 8 ball for year 1. Year 2, it was just probably people. I think what the athletic department looked at was seeing this team struggle in a SWAC West that was not very, shall we say, intimidating. Alcorn State looked like they were going to be world beaters. Then they fell apart at the end. Southern, they had their woes with their now former head coach, Eric Dooley. Pine Bluff and Valley Pine Bluff, Valley's in the East. Pine Bluff was never in it. And neither was Texas Southern after Andrew Body got hurt. And Prairie View just kind of like stayed the course. They were kind of like, to use the WWE analogy, they were just hanging out in the corner, in the turnbuckle in the corner during the Royal Rumble while the other participants threw each other over the top rope. And then Prairie View came in at the last second, threw the last person over the top rope and won the Royal Rumble. That's pretty much what the SWAC West was this year. And people looked at that and said, well, if Hugh Jackson can't win the SWAC West with this year being as down as it is, then why is he here? And that's a fatal mistake. I mean, you're starting to cycle all over again, because whoever this new head coach is going to have to cycle out what other athletes Coach Jackson brought in, whatever strategies offensively and defensively, he's going to have to make his own way with that. And right now, it's a program in turmoil, and that's something I didn't think we would ever say about a school that had Eddie Robinson there for nearly, or actually over 50 years. So it's tough, but this is the way of the world nowadays with college sports. You either you get it done or you get done out the door. So that's what it is with Coach Jackson and Grambling at this point, unfortunately.
Brandon King, the sneakerhead himself. You know that before Hugh Jackson actually came to Grambling, he was offensive coordinator at Tennessee State, and you covered Tennessee State for us. So, what is your perspective on all this?
Sorry. Well, I kind of think that I'm of the opinion that you have to give a coach at least one recruiting class to kind of leave his mark on the program and to see where it is, and to pull the plug after just 2 years it seems a little bit abrupt. But even looking at some of the other aspects of it, in terms of and Ken and Chris have kind of touched on, the talent that you have now was at a higher level than when you got there. But now with Coach Jackson departing, are those guys going to jump into the portal? So now, as a program, you have to get into damage control and retention. That's what you have to do, because a lot of those guys are going to be looking potentially to leave, and you probably have other programs in the SWAC, maybe in the MEAC, or other FCS programs that are circling around like vultures, looking to see who they can pick off. And I think from a leadership standpoint, you kind of have to kind of look at maybe athletic administration in terms of they've got to get this hire right. There's been, some things with other coaches, the volleyball situation and all these types of things. So I think this is a critical time for Grambling, and whatever direction they go in, they have to get it right, because potentially, if they get it wrong again, it could lead to a even more of a house cleaning from that standpoint, and it could go up even higher than a head coach. But as far as look, I'm going to put in a plug. I wouldn't be opposed to him coming back to 3,500 John A. Mary, especially if look. I know some of those deals and resources, if they're coming with him, I would not be opposed to that. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and what they're going to say when this conference rolls around at 3:30.
Guys, Kendrick, let me step in real quick, because I'm reading some of these comments that are being made, and I want you guys now to know there is no massive buyout. The article is right there on hbcsports.com, where we indicate how Hugh Jackson is going to be paid out for the duration of his contract. Okay, he had a 4-year contract, $1.6 million, paying him a base salary of $400,000 a year. Of that 4-year contract, 2 years were guaranteed. Okay, this is the second year, and the only thing Grambling has to pay him is the remainder of that second year, which will be paid during the duration of the fiscal year. Okay, that is it. There is no $800,000 buyout. There is no massive, no massive sums of money that the school has to pay. Those are the details. So, I'm a firm believer. The best kind of fan is an educated fan. Go to the website and read the details. It's there. It's published. And unless something changes, those are the details that I was given with respect to how he's going to be paid out. He is not retiring. He was fired. I know that there was a report that surfaced indicating that he was retiring, because if he were retiring, believe me, Grambling wouldn't have to pay him a dime. But that is not the case. He was fired. The details matter. So please know this. I'm done.
For now, he's done for now. Let me ask y'all this. 2 years is all that, according to Ken, Hugh Jackson was guaranteed according to his contract. Why hire him in the first place then if he's only going to get 2 years at a job that you fired a previous coach who had some success for 8 seasons, and then kind of switched off a little bit. But why give a coach like Hugh Jackson just 2 years to prove himself? Is that fair?
Well, he was given 4 years to prove himself in theory. Like I said, 2 years of contract, but 2 years of it's just basically the money in terms of what's guaranteed. But in essence, if you just simply look at what he has done in the 2 years, while you can indicate that the bar is low, he's 3-8 the first season, 5-6 the second season, and by all intents and purposes, the program has improved. We don't know what to make out of the possible third year, but I will say this. I'm told that John Simon will likely be assistant head coach. John Simon is likely going to be named the interim head coach. And I'm just going to simply say this. Don't make him interim long. Remove that damn interim tag and name him the head coach. Because for those of you who may not know, John Simon is the cake underneath the icing. Now, I want you guys to think about this for a moment. When Hugh Jackson was named the head coach at Grambling in December of 2021, everybody, that it was big news. The very next day, you guys, and you Gramblingites know, where was Hugh Jackson at the very next day? He was down in Baton Rouge, and you knew and he was there with John Simon. Guess who he was going after? He was going after Deuce Williams. They got Deuce Williams. Hugh Jackson had never set foot on Grambling State University's campus when he agreed to be named the head coach. He had never set foot on there. And you mean to tell me that on his own volition, he automatically knew we got to go down to Baton Rouge to get this running back Deuce Williams? No. John Simon, who who played during his days in the NFL, Hugh Jackson was John's assistant, was his coach, running back coach. John Simon said, let's go to Baton Rouge and get this guy. So for continuity being what it is, and knowing how these players will jump in a minute to enter the transfer portal, this is a critical time. But for the state of the program, for the state of the university, and for the state of the student athletes who are there, who basically make the decision to come to these schools or wherever they decide to play because of the relationships that they develop with the coaches, you better not mess around and talk about, we're going to do a nationwide search. You can do that if you want to. John Simon needs to be named the head coach. That interim tag needs to move. I'm just telling you that right now. That's just my personal. Those are my personal thoughts. I have no say in the matter, but I am putting it out there.
So
this
Chris,
is not something you can play around with. That is the guy who is responsible for a lot of those guys, especially throughout the region, who made the commitment to come to Grambling to play. John Simon is the guy that made that happen.
So Chris, Brandon, if it's not John Simon, as Ken is pining for, they want to be his agent. But if it's not John Simon, who best fits Grambling at this point? Like, how do you go from Hugh Jackson to ex-coach? I'll start with Brandon.
If you, I think at this point you've got to bring in somebody that can one, galvanize the fan base, as well as your remaining student athletes, and has enough of a name and a cachet to be able to keep some of those guys. The easy way, the easy way to go is just call Coach Berry at Benedict, but everybody's going to be calling him, so you're going to have to stand in line for that. But that is a call that you make at the end of the day. As I sit here, do you go the quote unquote celebrity route? I'm gonna tend to think no, just because of this didn't turn out well. I'm gonna throw a name that's kind of been on my mind, and Chris will know this name. If I'm Dr. Scott, I give Coach Milstead a call. I think that what he was able to do in his short time at Delaware State, I think that ended prematurely. But I think with what would be down at Grambling, I would be interested to see what he might be able to do, especially if they can hang on to Chance and Chalk. If they can hang on to one of both of those guys, I think that is a call you should definitely make.
So, Chris, what about you? You have pined for Rod Milstead and the minute him leaving Delaware State, being fired there. So, who would you consider would be the best fit for Grambling at this point?
Well, Brandon stole my first answer because I definitely said that, the Chennisberry sweepstakes is on and popping right now. I mean, you got to think that those three schools with SWAC West openings, Southern, Texas Southern, and Grambling are going to be banging on his doorstep. But I will agree with Brandon also on Coach Milstead. Coach Milstead, for all of the foolishness that has gone on at Delaware State University, I actually got another call about that today earlier. So, Coach Milstead being able to coach Delaware State up to 5-6, and it probably should have been closer to 6-5 or 7-4. And as I mentioned before, they lost their offensive coordinator last year due to untimely death, and of course, kids got sick near the end of the year, so they just kind of fell off a cliff. So it would be interesting for Coach Milstead to take that on if Grambling were to have him, because he's got the experience. He's been a Division I head coach. He's coached at various levels, and of course, again, he was an all-time great football player at Delaware State, starting offensive lineman for the Super Bowl 29 champion San Francisco 49ers. So if you wanted to go to quote-unquote celebrity route, or even just, with someone with previous HBCU experience, you could do a lot worse than Rod Milstead, quite frankly. So, yes, those are two names that I would think would come to the top of the list. I would also probably throw on Anton Sewell, the assistant head coach at Morgan State as well. That's a name that people should probably be looking out for in these openings, because he's done a tremendous job building defenses with Damon Wilson at Bowie and now at Morgan. So that's a name people should probably look out for as well. But overall, Grambling has to make this one the next best one. And I'm going to agree with Ken. You really want to keep the kids that are already there. So I would say that John Simon definitely should be the pick.
Yeah, my pick would be to get a coach like Trey Oliver. I mean, like, they are a successful football team. They made a playoff appearance this year. They won a Celebration Bowl last year. He's a very tough-minded head coach, demanding but fair, I think. Just the most out of his players. Recruited one of the top players in all of the FCS as his quarterback, Davis Richard. I mean, you insert a guy like that, despite the fact he has HBCU ties, and sometimes we don't like to go with the HBCU coach to fill a job like this. But, like, aside from Barry, he would be probably the next one on the list for coaches. Like, I would be calling, like, right now to see if he would be interested in that job. And maybe, I know this might sound crazy, this in the situation, but like Eric Dooley. I know he got fired from Southern, but at the same time, he has Louisiana roots. He can recruit down there. He knows the SWAC. Despite his record and despite him being fired, like, he could be someone else you could consider that can move right in and get things done right away. But Ken got John Simon. There's some other candidates out there, so we'll find out soon enough the direction of the program in the coming weeks and months. But why would, I guess, John Simon not be considered a continuation of just the Hugh Jackson administration? It's something new that could possibly elevate Grambling back to contention for championships again.
You're saying, why wouldn't he?
Yeah, why wouldn't he? Because some people might say, well, John Simon is just somebody from just Hugh Jackson's staff. Like, why not get somebody different with a different voice, with a different perspective to coach Grambling?
Well, look, man, I've been doing this a long time, and I've gauged the reaction of fans and the type of coaches that they look for whenever coaching vacancies become available at HBCUs. And one of the common things that I hear them say all the time is, well, I tell you now, I don't want another HBCU retread. Okay. Well, in the same vein, I'm a firm believer that you have to hire a coach who has some familiarity with the HBCU landscape, the HBCU process. And you have to admit that, contrary to what, whether you want to believe it or accept it or not, there is a certain characteristic about HBCUs that don't necessarily navigate the same way. And the thing is, I'm not going to sit up here and say that it's necessarily a bad thing, but as people like to say, it is what it is. And so you can't ignore it. And I would say that in many instances, even though I didn't necessarily agree with the firing of Hugh Jackson, there were some characteristics about Hugh Jackson because he wasn't familiar with, he was familiar with the Grambling brand, but he wasn't necessarily familiar with the Grambling culture. And that was a process that I think he was, slowly but surely, becoming more and more familiar with. But in the case of John Simon, when you put in consideration what fans typically look for, he's a guy that's from the region. My understanding is that he has parents who attended HBCUs, is familiar with the region, is familiar with HBCUs, is familiar with the challenges in the landscape, in the various ways in which they tend to navigate. But when you look at his body of work and just look at where he's been, and again, HBCU fans always look for these type of things. Yeah, we have to, but he is Black. Okay, we had this conversation last night. But he's played at the NFL level, he's coached at the FBS level at PWIs, and he's coached under coaches who've gone on to do some pretty magnificent things, including his last stint at University of Memphis when Mike Norvell was there. And we see what Norvell is doing right now. So, and he played football at Louisiana Tech. So the larger point is that unfortunately, we've gotten into this trend to where we're always looking for these splash hires. Whereas if you really look at some of these FCS programs that have dominated at the PWI level, you'll notice that a lot of the coaches that they hire, once the head coach goes and goes to another program or maybe moves up to an FBS program, you know what they do? They just simply say next man up. They hire from within because they realize they understand the importance of keeping continuity, not only within the players, but just within the overall structure of what's already been established and what's been built. There is no, as far as I'm concerned, given where Grambling is right now, and I don't want to make it, Grambling doesn't have a habit of just firing coaches after two years, unless they just do something that's just, there's no history there for that. But in this particular instance, you don't need splash, you need wins. And I think you have to recognize, Hugh Jackson couldn't do it all by himself. And so I think at some point you have to put in consideration the individuals on his coaching staff who played a role in at least getting him to this point, to where, granted, the bar is low, but the program has improved. And therefore you have to take a look within to see who were the key players who made it possible for him to build the foundation that's already in place without having to necessarily blow it up and build it all over again. I think to be honest with you, I think this is a no-brainer. You have to do your due diligence. I understand that, someone has to stay in charge of the program in the interim, but John Simon is the guy that I'm shooting for. And like I said, he doesn't need to be interim for very long. He needs to be the head coach.
Ken, Chris, Brandon, is there something to be said for people who pining for splash hires or celebrity hires, that maybe these guys can come into these programs and give HBCUs something that they couldn't get on their own or lacked before based on their name? Is there something to say for the validity of that, or it's just like pie in the sky type of dreams that
look,
Ray Lewis or Ed Reed and work their magic?
People make these splash hires, or when we seen these splash hires, we saw it happen at Jackson State. We saw what Deion Sanders did for Jackson State, but that's Deion Sanders. No one can repeat what Deion Sanders did. We saw what Deion Sanders did when he got to Colorado with respect to splash and all the attention that went along with it. But then reality sunk in, and you see where they are right now. So my point is that with respect to Jackson State, it appears at least 1 year after Deion, they've been able to keep the foundation in place, and it appears that they're building the program based on the foundation. And again, we've had this conversation before about TC Taylor and the job that he's done up to this point, given all of those players that left the program and how he's been able to maintain. But keep this in mind. To Jackson State's credit, and again, it may be too early to tell as to whether or not it was a good deal, but when Deion Sanders left, TC Taylor was the next man up. They hired from within. So again, all you have to do, everything doesn't have to necessarily be about wiping the slate clean. Maybe, philosophical difference. And in Grambling's case, a right decision here or there could have resulted in an additional win or two. And who knows, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So yeah, there's something to be said about splash hires in which they may only be good for as long as that splash is good for, but I think more often than not, it's all about substance, man. It's all about substance over style. And I think that we kind of have to go back to kind of like the basics, in which, just like any other job, it's all about hiring the best qualified person to get the job done. And you can't argue with the qualifications of John Simon.
So Chris,
And I was going to say,
I was going to let Chris and Brandon get the last words in on this one. Starting with Chris.
Splashes are good initially, but eventually that water dries up. You need to build something long-lasting, long-term, and not for the moment. It sounds like we're talking about relationships here, but no, we can talk about college sports in the same vein. Like, you can't just literally go with just who looks good on paper, because paper is one thing entirely, and how chemistry and connections matter. And granted, Deion, as much as I hate to give him credit for anything, quite frankly, he did what he's supposed to. He did a good job at Jackson State. He had that team on national television, doing all these different appearances and things, 2 Celebration Bowls. They lost both of them, but they went to 2 Celebration Bowls. So, granted, but as soon as a bigger, higher paying, more prestigious job came up, he was gone. You can't keep, looking at, okay, this person played in the NFL, this person played in the NBA, this person played in the WNBA or whatever, and just feel like, okay, they're going to come in and be a savior, because it doesn't work like that. You need someone, yes, you need people who are familiar with HBCU culture, HBCU life. And the fact of the matter is, you're going to have to feed 5,000 people with three fish and 2 loaves of bread, or however the old saying goes. That's the way of life at Black colleges. We don't have the resources that PWIs and the mid majors do. So you can't just expect somebody who's used to having all the resources in the world at their disposal, in their fingertips, to come in and say, okay, this is how it should go, this is how it needs to be done. And the fact of the matter is, it can't be done like that because the money just isn't there to do it. So you just have to really be mindful of what you're doing when you make these hires, and you have to make them long lasting. You have to make them long term. You have to make them make sense. And I'm not going to say that Hugh Jackson didn't make sense at Grambling, because Hugh Jackson is an offensive genius. Before the Cleveland Browns actually went to a playoff game a couple years ago, he actually coached a very terrible team to go 8-8. After I think an offer for that matter. So Hugh Jackson's a very good coach. So I'm not going to take that away from him. But at the NFL level and the HBCU level is 2 different levels, as we already are familiar with. So you, at some point, the splash just has to stop being a thing. You just have to start, building that that water tank up to where that reservoir up to where if the coach does move on, you can hire from within and continue the program. So splash hires, very overrated.
Brandon, your thoughts?
There we go. Okay, I had myself muted. I was saying it's tough to follow Reverend Stevens. I'm gonna do my best. I look at it like this: like you said, and everybody has articulated so brilliantly. The splash, it's good. It's good for that feel good in the minute. It gets you excited. In the meantime, but at the end of the day, it comes down to as it has been said, can you win? Because for every, you know, and again, Deion Sanders is the most recent example of the quote unquote celebrity splashy hire that came in and had success. But we can look at other coaches that may have had names. It was in the professional ranks, look at Tyrone Wheatley. Was it Morgan? Help me out on that, Chris. Was Morgan? He was at.
Yes.
Yes, and he was god awful there.
See, and you can look at Cynthia Cooper, who was at Texas Southern, or Juan Dixon at Coppin. All of these who splashy names that that we know and we saw, they all ended in less than loads of success. So, and then you compare that with the programs that are on top or that are consistently winning right now. Whether you look at what Coach Oliver has done at Central, you look at what Buddy Pugh did at South Carolina State, or even looking at it at a SWAC programs and the model of consistency that Fred McNair has been. And these aren't at the time or even now they weren't splashy hires, but these were guys that got in there, not only understood the culture, but were able to do what's more importantly, and that's win. So after the new coach smell wears off, it's a matter of what can you do. So it's not just about a name; it's about what you can do in the game. And said this it's not all about a name. I'll just leave it at that because I'm done. I'm gonna bow out.
Let me just add that
Ain't about the name, it's about the game. Now that's some preaching. That's some preaching.
let me just add that in addition to using Jackson State as an example of them hiring from within, keep in mind when Jay Hobson left Alcorn State to go to, I think, Southern Mississippi, Alcorn hired from within, and they tabbed Fred McNair. We saw what we've seen what he's been able to do since he was the head coach. And while you can say it was the back door, well, when Eric Dooley left Prairie View to become, don't cut me off, man. Bubba McDowell, was tabbed and internally was named the head coach at Prairie View, and now they're playing for a SWAC championship title. So, granted, and you can say they came to the back door, but the point of the matter is, I'm sure Grambling folks would love to be in Prairie View's shoe right now, playing for a SWAC title, as opposed to sitting on the outside looking in. So the point that I'm trying to make is that hiring from within is not necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a splash hire. You just want to make sure you get somebody who's experienced enough, who's familiar with how to get things done, and who can just produce wins, man. I mean, that's ultimately what this is about. So the Grambling doesn't have to go after a splash hire. I understand the need to maybe call out and get some feelers, but for the sake of the program and the overall benefit of where things are right now, and trying to avoid a disaster, if you will, hiring from within could very well be the best step to take.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to leave it there this afternoon. Good discussion all the way around. To Cameron Child, who broke the story this morning. Chris Stevens, Brandon King for the great commentary. I'm Kendrick Marshall. Follow our coverage of this story and more on our website, xcusports.com.
Hit that like
Social
button.
media.
Damn it.
Yeah, hit the like button, subscribe, do all that stuff they tell you to do at the end of these videos. And we'll catch y'all on the other side. Thanks.
Thank you all.